Yeah. Hey, Lydia, got one more. And I think you got a couple more hook on the corner. All right, it's coming. We're going to get there. All right, friends. If you've been going to kind of it's called like mainline Protestant church, you've probably heard this story. It's called the Walk to Emmaus. Everybody say, Walk to Emmaus. It's pretty famous. We only have so many stories of the resurrected Jesus to go on. This story has a couple of layers that make it kind of clergy favorites, right? And if it's your favorite, you're going to talk about it when you can. One of which is kind of this kind of dichotomous element, right? So Jesus died on the cross, 3 days later is resurrected, and these disciples see him on the road and they don't recognize him. There's something about this that always gets me, right? I've only been here, I'm coming up on a year of being y'all's pastor. These disciples have been following Jesus for 3 years. If I died and came back 3 days later and you didn't recognize me, I'd feel a little hurt. But they don't recognize him. And as he's there and they have this conversation about what happens in Jerusalem and the rumors at that point of his resurrection, he then engages them in, my best understanding, is Bible study. He starts opening up the scriptures, talking to them, and the conversation is so good that they don't realize how the 7 miles are going. You ever have a conversation like that? Where time just seems to go out the window? And later at the end of the story, good Methodists hear this line, when he was speaking to us, did you not feel your heart burning within you? Okay, I got to talk about my Methodist heritage. John Wesley, John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, when he finally feels like he becomes a Christian in true, he says his heart was strangely warmed. So, for this Bible study to take place. But in the midst of this Bible study, do they recognize him? When do they recognize him? At the table. And did you hear in how I read it to you? He took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. This is why it's one of the clergy favorite ones. Anything that's just so communion heavy, it's great. But the thing I wanted to focus on in particular is taking just a hair step back. Have you ever been in the presence of Jesus and not known it? Or as the book of Hebrews writes, entertained angels without knowing it? As a pastor, somebody who approaches church, our kind of like whole job of clergy and church staff are trying to lower the barriers of you meeting Jesus here. We want to get that time between you encountering Jesus and you recognizing Jesus as close together as possible. And sometimes that's hard because of cultural or societal impacts. My internship was in an African American church, and I remember when my parents came to see me, they had a hard time taking it in as church. Mostly because the sermon was an hour and a half. Smoke, so I remember my dad going, smoke break? I'm like, yeah, go, right? Just do what you got to do. We've had people here, friends of mine, who have come to visit Spirit of Hope UMC, and the words my friend used to me, this church preaches the gospel, but I don't recognize it. Threw me for a loop. As a parent, there are many days I mean, I will tell you, at the core of my being, I believe that raising my children is the most important thing I'll ever do with my life. But there are days that my kids make that very hard. Right? You know, I talk about like believing, seeing the Jesus moments in that moment. And I racked my brain, especially in churches, because when I was talking about my sermon today with my wife is a pastor, another Methodist pastor. She pastors, I'm not going to tell you because I don't want you to go see her. Because she's a much better preacher than me. There were times, despite being a pastor for the time I've raised my kids, I've had breaks. Mostly when I had kids. Because in the Methodist system, in the United Methodist, in Minnesota, there is maternity leave and paternity leave. And it's equal, 13 weeks. Amen. It's great. Now, I'm gone for 13 weeks. What do you think the church does? Panic. No. I'm gone, and when it was my first, I announced he's going to be born in October, and I get to break up the weeks. So Bethany could stay home, run out her maternity leave, and when she went back to work, my paternity leave started. So we had months where my kids got to stay home with a parent, right? Great stuff. I share this not to brag. I share this, one, should that not be the goal for everyone? Should that not be the world we're working towards? We're both parents, where every new life that comes into a family can be so celebrated and recognize that the first years are so precious that we support that. And the Methodist Church, this isn't just my local church, really wanted to support, all three of them support initially, but then the next thought is, so what are we going to do? The Minnesota Annual Conference covers the cost for a supply pastor. Covers the cost to support their clergy in those times. That's one of the things when you say we're giving to apportionments, everybody's like, that's just the denominational tax. It goes to supporting that. Now, in those times, I'm the kind of pastor who still goes to church on my Sundays off. I know my wife thinks I'm a little weird. And so one of my times, I've had good experiences and bad, and I had like 3 different kind of bad experiences inside of local churches that I was thinking about going with, because some churches just don't handle kids well. But I'm not going into any of those stories, because I will guarantee you that each one of those churches would say that they are trying their best. And just because I didn't have a good experience doesn't mean that I'm not trying to put anything on them. Now, as a parent who's also clergy, trying to develop, what does growing up in faith mean? How can I lower this for parents? How can I help myself, of all things, see in my kids how this is the ministry of Jesus? There was this author who was right at the beginning of her coming up. Her name was Nadia Weber. She's still kind of a speaker, but she's kind of gone in good directions. But when she started, she talked about holy chaos, right? And she got this kind of big following going. And Bethany and I, we're like on her train. And she came to speak. And we're going to sit, and we're going to listen, and we can't wait because it's Nadia, and we got our kid, and we're like, okay, this is great. And we sit down, and it was a free event, and we're in a church. We're in this giant Presbyterian church. Just huge. And we're sitting there, and we're not that far away, because we got there early enough because the kid had to nap. And, you're doing the calculations of nap time to awake time, and we got something wrong. The kid woke up while Nadia was speaking. And we're like, oh no. Because that one wanted to keep talking. He wasn't being overly distracting. He wasn't being a chaotic mess. He's not throwing a temper tantrum. He's not being overly aggressive. He's just, wah, wah, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, ha, 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 ha. And Nadia, we can see her, she's talking, and we're like, ha, ha, ha. And the woman sitting in front of us, this is not the whole organization, this is just the person. This woman sitting in front of us turned around and said, can you take this child out of here? And we laughed. We're like, she's talking about holy chaos. That's the topic of her conversation. And so we kind of laughed, and she got as serious as a heart attack. She looked at us and went, I'm not kidding. She turns, like, just snap. That snap of her neck during back around, whew. And she's lucky I don't have heat vision, right? But then, my child is calming down, and he's being a little quiet. And Nadia makes this great point. You know when the pastor makes a great point and you can just feel it in the room and everyone's going, oh. You all act like that. And then he cries out, yeah! And Nadia catches her ear, because it just echoes through the church. And Nadia looks right at me and goes, don't you dare take that little one out of here. That's the only thing that makes me feel normal. It instantly healed me. It instantly set me now on a path that I'm like, this is it. This is everything as a parent mixed with a pastor. Like, never. We are all God's children. I suddenly saw. Why? Not because of the words she said, not the teaching she had in her book, but because in that moment, she made a community with me. I wasn't just here listening to a speaker. Me and Nadia were like this. We are bound in a moment, and in my eyes are open. It's not the communion table, it's the community that is formed. This just happens to be one of the great means of grace that God uses. But whatever we can do to build that community, that our eyes might be open, that we suddenly see the angels in front of us. This is the great devotional task within us. But this passage isn't just compassionate to our hearts. It is instructional to us as individuals and us as a church. We are called not just to try and attempt to see where God is in front of us and cultivate that, but grow it. It's picking up my youngest from Sunshine Valley. And the older two, well, they need to come with. Because of course they need to come with. And the eldest, I can name him. I can name this one. Calvin runs ahead. He sees, and I don't know if any of you are here. One of you this might have been you. He charged ahead of me. I'm like checking him out way in our education room, and Calvin just tears off running to open up the door for this mom with a stroller. Tore off running to open that door. And he's just like, because our handicap accessible doors, we are still working on them, I promise you. It's not my fault. An electrical current shorted everything, and we were working towards it. But anyway, my eldest is opening up the door. When I finally get to him, I'm like, Calvin, what was that? What was that? You know what he says to me? We're church people, Dad. That's what we do. We help. Now, some of you are like, well, he's got such a good dad, and he does. But if it was about me, or if it was about my family, trust me, we've got enough pride in that, he would have said, it's because we're Nelsons. He didn't do that. He didn't say because we're Nelsons. He said because we're church people. Where did he learn that? From you. from you. And it is on you and me and all of us to not spoil that impression. That might be his charge, not just when he's 9, but when he's 90. He might use different language around it. He might mature in the faith, but he is on a mission to help people because of the church he's a part of. For the ways that you have done this, Spirit of Hope, who have modeled that for my kids and for the kids at Sunshine Valley and the kids within your own building who didn't go here or didn't go to Sunshine Valley, thank you. Keep going. Keep going. And it's not just for kids. Kids, of course, are the growing part, but you also have Prism. You have Simpson Shelter. You have your donations to the annual conference. You have ways of being church that have expanded outside of our buildings, not just to here, this community where it's as close as we can come, but to every ring outside of this building. Our presence at Pride, our testimony to the annual conference, that inclusion and embracing people of LGBTQI+ is not just something, a flag to wave, but something to be embraced fully. And we can do this not just as a part of our Christian faith, but immersed in our Christian faith. This is how we are walking alongside disciples, not just today, but forever. Praying that one day the Spirit moves and eyes are opened. I'm on this journey with you. Sunshine Valley, I'm on this journey with you. We're on the Emmaus Road together. The day that we eat together, whether it's today or in the days to come. That in the building of community, we may see Jesus in. Amen.